Listen to your breath.
Late. Daniel slid into the rental car. He placed the contract he had just been handed on the passenger's seat so he would have it ready when he drove by the little check the rental contract booth at the exit. He had shoved his travel bag into the back seat, but not before pulling a USB cable from the outer pocket. He searched around the car's console. When he found the USB port, he plugged the cable in and then pushed the mini end into his phone. He tried placing the phone on the dashboard, but he could tell that it would slide around when he turned. He inverted it into the cup holder, but realized immediately that it would be impossible to see the map as he navigated. He turned around to face the back of the car, knelt on the driver's seat, and reached into the bag to find a rolled-up pair of socks. He used them to hold the cable to the bottom of the cup holder and hold his phone upright where he would be able to glance at it if he needed to. He started the car with the discomfort he always felt when he rented one of the new models that had a button and a radio frequency fob instead of a proper keyhole ignition. He adjusted his seat's position. He adjusted his rearview mirror. He adjusted the temperature settings. He set the radio preset buttons to the 2 NPR stations he knew came in here. He said, "Okay, Google," and waited for the bloop from his phone that meant Google was ready to listen to his command. Navigate to Mom and Dad's place. Okay, navigating to Mom and Dad. After a moment, she added, exit the parking garage and turn left. Thank you, Sacagawea. Daniel did this every time he remembered to do it when the navigator spoke. He almost never had an opportunity to do it in front of anybody else, so it was really just a joke he did for himself. He very much wanted to get the navigator to respond to, "Okay, Sacagawea," instead of "Okay, Google." But hacking software wasn't anything he knew how to do, and he certainly wasn't going to spend a bunch of time learning how to do it or hiring someone to do it for him. When he found himself considering Googling for a YouTube how-to video right that minute on his phone, he knew he was stalling. He let out a long breath and pulled out of the parking space. His plane had landed more than an hour late, which wasn't all that bad considering the fact that his plane had taken off more than an hour and a half late. He had texted his parents from the tarmac in LA to tell them that it looked like he'd be late arriving, and they had told him not to call when he landed as they might be asleep. His mother had called as soon as he texted her. "Just come straight from the airport. If we're going to sleep, we'll just leave the door unlocked and you can let yourself in and lock it behind you. If it's locked, it means we're still up and you can just ring the bell and we'll let you in. Easy peasy." You know you could have just texted back at me. "I know, but that seems like such a lot of trouble when I can just ring you up and say what I have to say." "Okay. I'm so glad you're coming to stay here instead of going to some awful hotel. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be good. Right? We almost never get to see you." "Okay. I'll be there in, a bunch of hours." "Fly safely." "Oh, I don't think they'll be putting me in charge." Your father always says that?" Daniel told her that he did know that. Then they had hung up. Now he was stalling. He wanted them to be asleep. He wanted to let himself in, go to the guest room and not have a conversation, not have to hug and hear about how much taller he seemed than she remembered, not have to explain why he was in Boston. He wished for the 200th time that he had gotten a hotel room. It was a business trip. He could write off the expense, and he was making enough on this deal to cover a little bit of comfort for himself. He had decided to save money and guilt. He told his parents he would stay in the guest room in their apartment on Memorial Drive. Condo. They liked to call it a condo. Every time he said apartment, one or the other of them would say, "It's a condo." He tried to remember to use the language they liked because he didn't like the tone with which they corrected him. They lived in a condo on the 18th floor of a tall apartment building. He had thanked Sacagawea several times for her instructions when he failed to make a slight left and she announced that she was recalculating. He thanked her and drove in silence, waiting for her to direct him. When she did, he thanked her. He followed her direction until he made a wrong turn again, and then he again allowed her to remap his route for him. He parked in one of the spots designated for visitors and went to the front door of the building. He tapped on the glass so that the guy behind the security desk noticed him and buzzed him in. He was never sure whether the guy was a guard or a doorman or what. He waved to him as he pulled his rolling luggage behind him through the front entrance. The guy said, "You're Daniel Grunman?" "Yeah." The guy chuckled. "Wow, you're an easy laugh, man. Your mother told me you were coming. I sort of thought you were, a kid, 20s, Based on her age?" The guy choked a little bit. "Right. Didn't really think about that. Just, the way she talks about you." "I don't know how she talks about me. I know how she talks to me, and that's really as much as I can take." "How does she talk about me?" "Oh, she calls you her youngest. Says you're a talented kid, but you smoke too much pot, that sort of thing." "She knows I quit smoking pot." "Okay. More than 10 years ago." "Okay. Also, you're not really a kid so much." "Right? Wow, when you say that, though, you sound just like her." "Okay." He headed to the elevator and pushed the button for his parents' floor. He leaned against the wall of the elevator and rested his hand on the handle of his luggage. He watched the numbers change as he passed the floors. He hoped the door would be unlocked when he got there. He stepped off the elevator, realized he had left his luggage behind, spun around in time to stop the door from closing and have a brief imagining of the sensor not working so that the machinery would crush his hand, and then, when that did not occur, he retrieved his bag. He listened to the soft hush of his suitcase wheels on the carpet as he walked the hallway. He took a moment to hope again that the door would be unlocked as he reached for the knob. The knob did not turn. He sighed. He paused. He considered waiting until he heard the door unlock and then waiting another 15 minutes and then letting himself in and going straight to the guest room. He rang the bell. From inside, he heard his mother shout, hang on, honey, I'm coming, don't go anywhere." Although he could only make out enough of his father's voice to catch the inflection, he knew what the man was saying. Where's he going to go? You think he's going to book a flight back home if you don't answer the door fast enough? He heard footsteps on the wooden floorboards of the entryway. He heard the clicking of the deadbolt. The doorknob jiggled. Then the deadbolt clicked again. Then the doorknob jiggled. Mom shouted, hang on, just give me a second, don't go anywhere. Daniel shouted, where am I going to go? The deadbolt clicked again. Paul said something in the muffled distance that Daniel knew to be an explanation of the latch lock controlled by the button at the middle of the doorknob. Mom shouted, very funny, it always takes me a second, just stay put. You think I'm going to book a flight back home if you don't answer the door fast enough? Mom shouted, your father just said the same thing. You don't have to yell, I'm right on the other side of the door. Mom shouted, what? Dad, in the distance, repeated what Daniel had just told her. Then the door opened, and the visit began. Daniel crossed the threshold into air, long saturated with the smell of fried food and Merit cigarettes. He opened his arms wide and hugged a little bit less than he allowed himself to be hugged. Ellen said, oh, it is so good to see you. You can't see me. The side of your whole face is pressed up against my chest. Right you are. She did not stop hugging him. She held on for significantly longer than Daniel felt comfortable being held on to. He used one hand to fumble behind himself until he found the edge of the door and swung it closed with a thump and a click. He hoped that sound would be enough to signal the end of the embrace. Instead, Ellen pushed back just enough to look at his face. She rearranged his hair in a way that felt to him entirely too intimate for the mother-son relationship. When did you get this tall? About 23 years ago. I don't remember you being this tall. I know, you never do. I used to carry you around. You want to carry me around again? Because if you want to try, I'm pretty tired. Don't be funny. Paul joined them in the tiny alcove of a foyer. That's a terrible thing to say to a comic. Comedian. Ellen said, what's the difference? Daniel said, cufflinks. If I have to stay in the foyer, I'm going to need a blanket or at least a big towel. Don't be silly. Why would we make you stay in the foyer? Ellen. I have no idea, but you don't seem to be letting me come into the apartment. Oh! Ellen backed up so she was no longer keeping her son in place and took him by the hand to lead him into the wide expanse of the living room dining room space. Daniel wondered why he allowed it, but he allowed it. You got a bunch of different furniture since I was here last. Ellen beamed. No! Reupholstered the couch and then had the reading chairs done to match. And we rearranged a bit for better light and flow. Flow? I heard a thing about feng shui on NPR. Daniel nodded. Paul said, I call the design style urban sprawl. Nice. Ellen said, I don't think that's really a design style. Ellen. You should have a conversation with the people who design traffic in Boston, Daniel suggested. The flow is terrible. Paul said, it's a pain in the ass, isn't it? They do it that way because they figure if you don't live here, you don't deserve to get where you're going. Oh, I don't think it's conscious, Paul, do you? I just think Boston came together as a metropolis in the days before urban planning was a thing. You're probably right, dear, you're probably right. He exchanged a look with Daniel, who tried not to laugh. Well, whatever the reason, it's maddening. The GPS navigator in my phone was reduced to stammering apologies. That's silly. It's not really programmed to do that, is it? Does ours do that, Paul? I almost never use it. Are you kidding? By the third time I missed the soft right to get me back to Memorial Drive, it wasn't even giving directions. It was just screaming obscenities at me. Ellen slapped at his arm playfully to suggest that she was certain now that he was kidding. They moved together toward the small breakfast table, the only table Paul and Ellen ever used when they were not entertaining guests. Despite setting him up in the guest room, they did not think of Daniel as a guest. Daniel felt entirely okay about that. Sitting at the breakfast table seemed natural to him, wholly familiar, familial. Paul said, You want a drink? No thanks, I'm okay. Well, I'm sure going to have a last one. Ellen? Oh, what the hell, sure. Then she spoke earnestly to Daniel. I don't usually have more than 2. So you've said. But we started Scrabble early today, so it should be fine. Daniel heard the sentence for the gibberish it was. He also knew exactly what she meant. She meant that their daily Scrabble games had started early, which meant that her first drink had come earlier than usual. She felt, therefore, that she'd had more time since her first drink than usual and could allow herself another. He also knew that the number of drinks was not affected by the size of the drinks, that some drinks could be discounted based on brand or temperature, and that the more drinks she had, the more proofs she would be likely to offer that she was not an alcoholic. While Paul poured scotch over ice, Daniel moved past him to get a glass of water. Paul said, I thought you didn't want anything. It's just water. Ice? Sure. He held out the glass. His father dropped in a couple of cubes. Ellen said, I'm not even usually up this late, so sure, why not? One more. Daniel said, You know you're allowed to stay up late and not have a drink. Paul said, Daniel. Ellen said, Don't be silly, I don't mind. Paul glared at his son. They sat together at the table, ice clinking in glasses. Paul peered into his drink as though he was reading his future in the array of his ice cubes. Ellen gazed at her son as though she saw the child he had once been and hoped to see through time to what he would look like as a grown-up. I didn't think you two would still be up when I got here. Yeah, we waited up. I'm touched. I can't believe how tall you've gotten. Ellen. Daniel said, If you want to do this scene again, we should reset to the entryway. Ellen said, What? Doesn't matter. Thanks for letting me stay here while I'm in town. Paul said, You always have a home here if you need it, you know, briefly. Daniel chuckled. Paul. She turned to Daniel and said, You are welcome to stay here any time you want for as long as you want. Thanks, Mom, but really the 2 days is about all any of us can handle. Ellen sipped her scotch. Ooh, this is good. This isn't the Jameson. It's the scotch. It's the good scotch. Yes. Daniel sipped his water. He felt an ice cube bounce against his upper lip. Ellen said, So you're in town for work? Yes, I am. But you're not doing one of your little comedy gigs? No, and I generally just refer to them as gigs. Paul said, Are you being deliberately oblique? Is there some sort of secret about what you're doing? Daniel sighed. No. It's not a big secret. I'm ghostwriting, so it's a little secret. I have to spend a couple of days interviewing the guy so I can write his autobiography. Ellen said, "Ooh, who is it?" That's the part that has to be a secret. Why is that? Because that's how ghostwriting works. It's a politician who needs to have a book out and knows how to sell a book but doesn't know how to write a book. So you have to write it for him? No, Mom, I get to write it for him, and I get to be paid pretty damn well for it. Ellen's eyes widened. She reached across the table and put a hand on his. Oh, that sounds terrific. And if that gets published, you get into the Writers Guild, right? What? Like your sister did? The Writers Guild? That's what it was called, isn't it, Paul? Yeah, that was for that situation comedy thing that she wrote. God, that thing was awful. Daniel said, no, ghostwriting a politician's autobiography will not get me into the Writers Guild. Paul said, oh, it's a shame. Your sister's been making a good living, I think, since she got into that guild. Yes, she has. Ellen said, I don't understand why this doesn't get you in. A book is a lot harder than a silly little sitcom. Well, first of all, guild qualification isn't based on level of difficulty. Secondly, I'm not getting credit on the book, so even if it could qualify me, I don't like that. You should really ask to get credit for your work. Ellen, that's not how ghostwriting works. Well, I don't think that's right. And thirdly, the WGA is for screenwriters. You don't get in for writing a book. Ellen said, really? I figured if you had a book published, you'd be allowed in. Daniel paused. He sipped his water. He said, no. He looked to his father, but Paul stared into his drink. Daniel said slowly, and I've already had 2 books published. Ellen laughed lightly. Oh, honey, of course you have. I don't think of those as real books. Daniel blinked. He knew that she thought what she had said would serve as a course correction. He knew that she believed somehow that what she had said was an apology. Daniel said, seriously? What? Paul said, come on, Daniel, don't do that. Daniel looked to him in disbelief. Paul, answering the unvoiced outrage, said, they both came out through that one little publisher. It might as well have been a vanity press. It's a boutique publisher. It isn't a vanity press. Okay. And you know, in modern America, self-publishing is considered entrepreneurial. Okay, look, you can tell yourself whatever you want about your books, but you don't get to be mad at your mother if she doesn't think of them as some huge accomplishment. Huge accomplishment? She forgot they existed. And she apologized for that. When? Ellen said, just now, you heard me. Daniel shook his head slowly. He sipped his water. He considered going out into the hall and waiting until his parents unlocked the door for him and went to bed. Paul turned his glass on its coaster. I don't understand what just happened. Daniel said, never mind, it doesn't matter. All your mother was saying, I know what she was saying. Paul started again, allowing his voice to turn stern and instructional. All your mother was saying, Daniel, was that she wants you to get the credit you deserve. Okay. Don't dismiss it like that, Daniel. You know, we all hear what we want to hear. I read a piece in Psychology Today about the way we talk past one another. And I think sometimes we hear what we expect to hear and not what's actually said, not what's intended. Okay. Your mother feels, and I feel too, that there's something inherently wrong about you not getting credit when you're finally actually working on what might be a proper book that I assume will be coming out from a real publishing company. Okay. Then, more quietly, he said, Jesus. I don't understand why this seems to be upsetting you so much. You understand that we're on your side, right? Yes, I do. I get that. But he shook his head from side to side, trying hard to dismiss the sting. So good. We're all on the same page. Okay. They sat in silence for a moment. Paul moved his coaster and his drink to the side. Ellen said, really? Sure, we're up. Ellen brought out the Scrabble board and unfolded it onto the center of the table. She picked a tile from the bag and held it up for Paul to see. She offered the bag to Daniel. He said, no thanks. Paul said, I don't understand. They all laughed lightly at Paul's feigned bafflement. Paul pulled a tile from the bag and showed it to his wife. She handed him the bag. He drew his first 7 letters. So far, so good. Daniel drank water. He finished the glass and went to refill it. Ellen said, you're thirsty. Yeah, flying always leaves me dehydrated. Okay. What does that mean? I worry. Ellen, don't do that. What am I doing? You're fishing. If you want to ask, just ask. Daniel said, Jesus. Paul said, have you noticed that we say Jesus a lot for a family of atheist Jews? I haven't, but I should write a bit about it. There's something there. Ellen said, just don't go all vulgar and shock value with it. Okay. Paul played a word and Ellen tallied his score. She arranged the tiles on her rack. As if it were just a stray thought that had crossed her mind, she asked, so, are you still not smoking pot? I quit smoking pot 11.5 years ago. Well, good. Good for you. Everyone gets dehydrated when they fly. Okay, it's fine. I believe you. She sipped her scotch. Look, it's late. I should probably get to bed. Paul said, is that because we started playing? We can put the game away. Ha! Ellen put all 7 of her letters on the board to form a word. She marked her score on the score sheet. The hell we can! Well, certainly not now. Paul studied his letters intently. No, it's not because you started playing. Travel is exhausting. Paul said, isn't it? Also, it messes with my digestion. Do you get travel stomach? Yeah. And the constant sense of disorientation is troubling. You know, you guys keep your ocean in the wrong direction? Ellen said, that's because we're on the whole other coast. Yes. Don't narrate the jokes, honey. I thought I was bantering. Paul snorted and played a word. Also, when I travel, I find myself constantly checking my pockets like Columbo arriving at a crime scene. I loved that show. Ellen played a word and added the score. You loved the character. You hated the show. Well, yes, I hated the format. It was so stupid. We know who committed the crime, he knows who committed the crime, and then it's just 2 hours of head games. Daniel said, it's Dostoevsky. Ellen said, what? Paul said, huh. Every episode of the original series was a reworking of Crime and Punishment. Wow, that's right, I think that's right. Paul moved the letters around on his tray, studying the combinations. Then the show went off the air and they started doing the occasional MOWs, and Paul said, what are MOWs? Ooh, Ellen raised her hand like a schoolgirl, showing off that she had done the homework. I know this, I read this somewhere. It means without sound, but I don't remember why. No, that's MOS, Mom. MOWs are movies of the week. And at that point, they just started hiring in regular network-approved writers from their own crime dramas, and none of them understood how to make the format work, so they just got them all wrong. Columbo is just another detective figuring it out as he went along instead of knowing right from the beginning and using the investigation to trap the killer in his own arrogance. Paul shook his head in amazement. Dostoevsky. I can't believe I never put that together before. He took his glass to refill it. Ellen held her glass up for him, and when he took it, she gestured with her finger and thumb close together to suggest that he should pour a very little bit for her. She explained to her son, I don't really need any more, but that's just such good scotch. Okay. Paul returned to the table and gave Ellen her refreshed drink. She sipped. Paul said, you really seem to have a strong understanding of this TV writing stuff. Yeah. Why don't you pick up some of that work? I would love to. I've been doing spec scripts for years. Ellen said, is that a show? Is what a show? Spec. Is that the show where the 2 boys in San Diego pretend to be clairvoyant? That's Psych. And it's set in Santa Barbara. And only one of them pretends to be psychic. Spec scripts are scripts written for extant shows as work samples. They're still called spec scripts because people used to write them on speculation hoping to sell them to the series. It doesn't really work that way anymore, though. I enjoy that show. I think they're funny, those boys. Yes. Yes, they are. Paul said, have you talked to Lindsay? All the time. No, I mean, about this. I should talk to Lindsay about how Mom enjoys Psych without seeming to understand any of its most basic elements? Ellen said, don't be funny. You really have to stop saying that, Ellen. What did I say? You remember when my 3rd grade teacher said, don't get smart with me, young man, and then I said, there's very little chance of that happening, and then I had to go to the principal's office? Ellen said, I do. I came down and stuck up for you. Yes. I couldn't believe that. What a terrible thing for any teacher to say to a student. Right. That's what Dad means when he says you should stop telling me not to be funny. Ellen played a word. She added her score. She sipped her drink. She shrugged in a way that suggested she was unimpressed by the analogy. Do you know that I was in therapy for 5 months last night? What? I was in therapy. For 5 months last night? Last year. Okay. I said last year. Okay. You heard me, Paul. I'm sorry, I wasn't really. He played a word. Ellen added his score. Why are you telling me about therapy? Hang on. Ellen played a word quickly as she picked new letters, her hand searching in the bag for tiles. She said, I was very worried that I'd been a terrible, terrible mother. To both of you, not just your sister, both of you. Okay. He introduced me to the idea of the good enough mother. I wasn't perfect, but you turned out okay, right? So I was a good enough mother. I was finally able to stop with the self-recrimination. Good. Good for you. So I think it would be very helpful to me if you would stop with the accusations. Honey, nobody was accusing you of anything. Well, I'm pretty sure Daniel was just trying to compare me to that awful teacher he had back in the 3rd grade. That's not exactly what I said. Well, maybe you should think about how people around you are going to hear what you say before you say it. That's all I'm saying. Then, with an off-timed wave of a dismissal, she repeated, That's all I'm saying. Daniel sipped his water. He pulled an ice cube into his mouth and shattered it between his teeth. He let the shards melt against the warmth of his tongue. You promise? Daniel, Ellen said. What? What did I miss? Paul played a word and Ellen scored it. Daniel looked into his glass of water, then recognized it as his father's mannerism and stopped. He set his glass on a coaster and turned it with his fingertips. He recognized that as well and stopped. He put his hands on his lap and felt awkward. Paul said, You haven't gone to bed. Yeah. Ellen said, Are you sure you don't want a drink? Yeah. Paul said, Do you mind if we put on NPR? Could you not? Okay. The game continued in silence for a few turns. Then Ellen tentatively said, So when do you start work? Tomorrow morning I'll be up early to drive out to the Cape for the day. Cape Cod? That's a drive. Make sure you leave enough time. Paul said, You'll be going against the traffic. It shouldn't be too bad. Ellen said, You should still make sure you leave enough time. You don't want to be late for your first day of school. Work. What? I'm driving to Cape Cod for work, not for school. Okay. I'll get directions from my phone. It estimates drive times pretty accurately. I love the way people just carry their phones around with them everywhere now. Paul said, I have a smartphone, but I don't think I'm smart enough to use it right. You know, when you were a boy, Daniel, we didn't even have an answering machine. If someone called and you weren't home, it just rang until they gave up. If it was important, they'd just call back later. Good story, Daniel said. Daniel? Daniel sighed. You don't have a cell phone, Mom? I have one. It's not the fancy kind like you and your father have, but I don't really need all that fancy stuff. Yeah, but it's good that you have one, just in case. Ellen went on. Of course, I don't carry it around with me everywhere I go like the kids do now. I mostly just leave it in the little charging stand by the door. Wait, you don't take it with you when you go out? No, I really only have it for emergencies. Daniel blinked slowly, writing jokes in his head. Mean jokes. Cutting jokes. Daniel, Paul said. What did he say? He didn't. He glared at Daniel. Daniel said, Jesus, what did I miss? Daniel sipped his water. Paul sipped his scotch. Ellen lifted her glass to her lips, realized it was empty, and set it back down with a slightly furrowed brow. Paul said, More? I don't really need any. Then she sighed. Paul took her glass and poured more scotch. He returned it to her. Ellen said, You really are a terrible influence. Yes. Daniel said, Jesus, you guys. Do you even see yourselves? Is there any self-awareness here at all? You sit here in a fucking haze playing Scrabble exactly the way you have every day since I was 5, hardly talking to one another and pretending that stasis is the same thing as happiness. Paul played a word and shifted his focus from the board to his son. Ellen scored the word, slid the back of letters toward Paul, and studied the letters on her rack. Paul said, Where is this coming from? Ellen said, You know what? You really have no right to sit here in judgment of us. Daniel stood up. He started talking. He repressed the impulse, turned to go to bed, changed his mind and turned back. In judgment of you? I can't judge you? I've been sitting here feeling like I'm barely on your radar, absorbing body blows of judgmentalism. My books aren't real. My ghostwriting gig isn't good enough because I'm not getting credit for it. I shouldn't be funny, which is, my career. Also, I shouldn't be vulgar, even though that's really not what I do anyway. And then suddenly it's like I'm sitting through some boozy production of a lost Pinter play. Oh, look, Ellen, it's Daniel Grunman playing Daniel Grunman, the role of a lifetime. Paul, that's not nice. I think Daniel is really upset. You think? Well, you certainly sound upset. Ellen. Yeah, okay, never mind. Ellen said, Is there something you want to talk about, honey? Because I don't think what you're upset about is really what you're saying it's about. What? Do you know why I think you're such a little grumpy pants? Such a little grumpy pants? Don't infantilize, Ellen. I think you're upset because we mentioned how well your sister is doing and you're a little bit jealous. That's what I think. She's got her television show on the Dynamite Channel and she's getting all this money and whatever else and you're still just traveling around doing your little comedy skits and picking up jobs writing other people's books for them. Okay. She could be right, Daniel. Okay. Your mother's not entirely out of left field here. And it's not your sister's fault you wasted all that time hanging around in Hollywood getting stoned when you could have been developing a career. Daniel thought about how much of his pot Lindsay had smoked over her first years in Los Angeles. Okay. Ellen played a word and added the score. Paul shifted his letters around in his rack. Daniel felt his eyebrows moving and realized he was having a whole conversation in his head. Ellen sipped her drink. Paul played a word, and while Ellen added his score, he crossed the room to the stereo system. He turned on National Public Radio, and a woman's voice began to drone on about the technicalities of parliamentary procedure being used to prevent a bill from reaching the floor for a vote. Paul sat back down and picked new letters from the bag. Only 3 left. Ellen said, Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go to bed. Daniel stood up. Paul pushed his seat back and stood up. Okay. We should be up in the morning, but if we oversleep, just let yourself out and let the latch lock behind you. Ring us when you have a sense of when you're getting back tomorrow, yeah? Okay. Paul pulled him into a drunken hug. It really is good to see you. Yeah. Paul sat back down. Ellen stood up and hugged him. I'm sorry you got so upset. Okay. She released him, took half a step back. I just can't believe how tall you've gotten. It's constantly shocking to me, too. Okay. She stumbled backward a bit, her calves bumping against her chair. She put a hand on the table to stabilize. I must be tired. That scotch is really hitting me. Paul said, I'm sure you are. It's pretty late. Okay. Good night, guys. Daniel grabbed his rolling bag and headed toward the guest room. Paul barked, Lift that up, would you? I don't like the wheel tracks on the hardwood. Yeah. Okay. He collapsed the extendable handle and lifted the bag. Alone in the guest room, he sat for a moment, the only sound the radio murmuring distantly, soothing and soft. He thought about the visits over the years, the subtle jabs, the unconscious attacks. He remembered the slights he had endured in silence when he was broke and needed money too much to risk rocking the boat. He remembered the drunken lectures about how he should stop smoking pot. He remembered seething in silence through the carefully worded conversations about how many artists find a stable life in academia. He muttered to himself, Oh, that was relatively painless, and felt a wry smile tug at the corner of his mouth. It certainly hadn't been as bad as it could have been, as bad as it had been sometimes in the past. Still, he felt an angry clenching in his solar plexus. A hollow sadness threatened to pull him into a small, fragile ball. A knock at his door startled him and he flinched. Yeah? The door opened. His mother stood in the doorway. It was an image that harkened back to his childhood, her figure framed and backlit, the last good night. I folded some towels in the bathroom for you. You'll see them. Thanks. If you get cold, I won't. There's an extra blanket on the top shelf in the closet. I know where it is. Okay. Ellen stood there, gazing at her adult son, trying to see back through time to the child he had once been. I feel like I should offer to read you a story. Yeah, I get that. I love you. You know that, right? He wanted to say that he loved her too, but it felt too much as though she was asking for him to, too much as though it would be a concession. All he could manage was, yeah, I know, me too. She nodded. He wondered what she was looking for as she tilted her head a bit to the side and studied him. She leaned against the doorframe and sighed. She said, It's so late. How did it get so late? Listen to your breath.